And this is kind of my very dumbed down, simplified version of coffee for beginners. So, first thing to consider when we're thinking about the actual plant is where is it grown? So we're thinking about terroir. Now, a general rule of thumb is that higher altitude coffees tend to produce more exotic flavors, sometimes fruit, some sweetness, and they tend to be more clear. Now, once again, this is a general rule of thumb. Don't jump down my throats in the comment. That is a general rule of thumb. Now, as we go down the altitude, you're going to get into more chocolatey, nutty coffees, and then as we go further and further down, we will get into a place of just generally coffees being muddy, not very clear, and these coffees we probably wouldn't consider specialty at that point. They would probably cut below kind of the specialty threshold, and they would just be your regular run-of-the-mill coffees. Now, that is the first thing to consider. Now, the second thing to consider, which a lot of people don't know, is varietal. So within the Arabica family of coffees, there are a ton of different species of the plant that will produce different flavors. So you can think about this in wine. You have different species of grapes, Riesling and Chardonnay. You have Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot. These different species of grapes produce very different wines. Same thing with coffee. So different species of the plant will produce different flavors. So Typica and Bourbon tend to be, more common. And then you have Caturra, you have SL28, and all of these varietals have unique characteristics. So if a bag of coffee mentions a varietal, and you're at a shop, the best thing to do would just be to inquire with the person working there about that particular varietal, or you can always jump on Google, punch in, for example, SL28. What does that mean? SL28 tends to be, a lot of dark fruit, plummy tones, commonly found in Kenya. So these varietals will affect the taste of the coffee quite a bit as well. So we have terroir, we have varietals. Now what? Okay, so now that we've covered kind of the very basics of the plant, we can get into the processing method. So these coffees grow inside of cherries. These cherries are then picked, and now we need to get the actual seeds out. So how do we do that? Now there's kind of three major ways that it's done: washed, naturals, and honey processing. Now, so for a water processed coffee or a washed coffee, that just means that the coffees go into a wet mill. They're in big tanks with water, and then they're pulped and separated from the flesh. These coffees tend to have like a more round finish and a very clean finish, and they tend to be a bit more round is the description that a lot of people use. Just means that all of the flavors are a bit softer around the edges, and there's not really a big aftertaste. Now, natural processed coffees, once again, sun drying beds, raised, turned into like raisins, and usually raked repeatedly until they're then milled. What does that mean? That means that the coffee is going to have a longer finish. Sometimes you're going to have like baked fruit, jammy tones from a natural processed coffee. They tend to be slightly more expensive. It really depends on the situation, simply because natural processed coffee is just more labor intensive at the farming level, and there's room for a lot more to go wrong during that process. So natural processed coffees, my personal favorite. That is another very common processing method. And then honey processing is kind of a hybrid of both, where the outside skin of the coffee cherry is taken off, and then they are dried, and that's why you get like a deep yellow kind of honey tone. So once again, honey processing, kind of a hybrid of both, so you can think about kind of both those characteristics coming together in a honey processed coffee. But in a general rule of thumb, those are the three major ones. Now we're seeing anaerobic processes and some fermentation processes becoming more and more popular. That just means that the coffee is in an anaerobic process. The coffee is being put into an area where there is no oxygen for a certain amount of time before they take it out and then go through another processing method. So those methods, though, are kind of outside the scope of this video. They're kind of new. And once again, if you see that on a bag, definitely ask the person working. Hopefully they can tell you an awesome story about kind of how that's being done. And there's a lot of different experimental methods right now that are being kind of played with. So now that we have processing method, so we have our terroir, we have the varietal, we have our processing method. Now the coffee is actually coming to wherever it's being roasted, and now we have roast level. So roasting. Pretty much what happens is there's two kind of cracks you want to think about. Now, when we call it a crack, this is when the bean cracks and releases CO2 during the roasting process. Now, after the first crack, the coffee is drinkable. You could pull the coffee at first crack and it would be extremely light, but drinkable. Anything before first crack would not be really palatable. It'd be super acidic. The coffee would be way too dense. It would probably destroy your grinder, that kind of stuff. So first crack, when that happens, then the coffee is drinkable. Now, between first crack and second crack, we kind of have a range of different roast levels. We have light, then we have medium light, medium dark, and then the second crack, I would say that is when you're in the realm of dark roast. So if you think about those two kind of cracks, that is the range that most of the coffees are going to be roasted. Once you pass second crack, I mean, you are going to go into actually starting a fire in your coffee roaster. So don't pass second crack too far. If you do want to get a coffee dark roasted, you could take it right to second crack, but anything beyond that is you're now running the risk of a real fire. So this will depend on the roaster's interpretation of how the coffee should be roasted, what's going to bring out the best in it, and where they kind of want to create this product for you to consume. Roast level is what is marketed to us, quite a bit in the media. It's what we all know about. I like the light roast, I like the dark roast, I like the medium roast. But like I said, it really depends on how that coffee interacts with that roast level. It's going to create the general taste. Now, if you like very dark roasted coffees, if you wanted to try something else, you're probably going to have to, slowly step down into the mediums, and then maybe you could go into something a bit lighter beyond that if you wanted to. Whereas, obviously, if you go from a dark roast right to a super light roast, it's going to be very different than what you're used to. So I would say, whatever roast profile you're in, just slowly play around with going outside of that comfort zone a little bit, and then you can try different things and develop your palate in order to say, oh, I really enjoyed that. I really didn't enjoy that, right? The other thing to consider is when you are changing roast profiles quite dramatically, the brew method can change quite a lot. If you're going from something very dark, where you're going to be wanting using actually cooler water temperatures and sometimes lower doses, you're going to something really light, now you might have a whole different set of parameters that you need to adjust to bring the best out of that lighter roasted coffee. So just something to be aware of if you are changing roast profiles quite a bit. It's worth noting that you will have to make a lot of changes to your brewing method, especially if the roast profile changes quite dramatically. So just your recipe and things like that. So that is the general gist of what you need to consider when you're buying coffee. So once again, we have terroir, we have varietal, we have processing method, and then we have roast profile. And once again, guys, there is no right answer. Anyone who's out there who's telling you this is good, this is bad, it's not true. You should be able to try a bunch of different things and figure out what you like and how you like it. I would just say, one thing I will say is that you're drinking coffee, I would try to drink it black. And if you're not enjoying the coffee you're drinking black, then maybe you should consider trying something new. That's my only kind of critique or advice for that kind of stuff. And then once again, guys, when you're changing all these variables, you might have to play with how you're brewing the coffee to get the best out of it. Once again, you can always ask the people you're buying it from how they would suggest brewing a certain coffee. So anyways, guys,